Today, we are going to study the verbs must and to have to. Let's start by learning when to use must and to have to. We use must and to have to say that it is necessary or obligatory to do something. Often, when speaking in the affirmative, it doesn't matter which one we decide to use. So, to say, I must go to the bank before it closes, is almost the same as saying, I have to go to the bank before it closes. The only slight difference is that must indicates strong obligation. However, there is a big difference between must and have to in the negative form. We use must not, or its contraction, mustn't, in the negative form to express a strong obligation not to do something. For example, you mustn't leave the gas on while we are on holiday. We use do not, have to, or does not have to, or with contractions don't have to, or doesn't have to say there is no obligation, or that something is not necessary. He starts work late, so he doesn't have to get up at 6. So mustn't and don't have to actually have very different meanings. Let's look more closely at the modal verb must. Do you remember what you learned about modal verbs in Unit 49? Let's start with an example. With must. It's late. I must hurry. Must is a modal verb. Modal verbs are used to indicate many different things, and they precede other verbs. The third person singular of modal verbs does not end in S. The infinitive form of modal verbs is not preceded by to, and modal verbs do not need the auxiliary verbs do or does in questions or negative sentences. Now, let's look at some examples of the modal verb must. Look at these examples with must. We must turn off the gas before we go on holiday. We must phone them and tell them not to come. If you have a toothache, you must go to the dentist. Now, let's look at the verb to have to. We'll start with an example with the verb to have to. I have to go to the dentist at 5 o'clock. To have to is not a modal verb, so it changes in the third person singular. For example, he starts early, so he has to get up at 6. The infinitive form is to have to, and to have to uses the auxiliaries do and does in questions and negative sentences. So, let's look at some examples of the verb to have to. We have to answer the questions in the exam. She has to look after 3 small children. They have to work overtime to finish the job. He has to wear glasses. His eyes are very bad. You mustn't forget what you've learned today, but you don't have to worry. It's easy.